I didn't meet the time traveler on a highway or in some secret lab. I met him under buzzing fluorescent lights, standing between two shaking washing machines and a 24-hour laundromat on a cold night in Alaska, 1996. I was half asleep, watching my clothes turn in circles, when he said my name in a calm voice, like someone who had known me for years, even though I was sure I had never seen him before. It was late enough that the streets were empty, and the snow outside looked more blue than white. The place smelled like cheap detergent and damp metal, and the small TV in the corner played an old game with the sound turned off. The clerk was asleep behind the counter, wrapped in a coat. Only the hum of the machines and the clink of coins broke the silence when he sat down too close, as if we had planned to meet there. "You're wasting time," he said, without saying who he was. It didn't sound like a threat or some self-help line. It was quiet, almost tired, like he already knew how my story would end. I gave a short laugh and asked if he meant my life, or just that stupid night spent washing clothes. He answered with something that froze me on the spot. "I've seen what you'll regret the most. It begins on nights like this." In that moment, I had no idea he was talking about my mother. All I knew was that, whenever the subject got close to her, I changed it, made a joke, or pretended I was busy. Pride is a quiet thing. You don't feel how heavy it is as long as you can still move. He, on the other hand, looked at me like someone who had carried that weight all the way to the end. Years later, I would still remember the way he held the metal tokens in his hand, turning one, then another, as if he was choosing which moment of my life to drop back into the machine. That night, I didn't believe a word he said. Today, I'm telling this story because I know he was right. He knew the worst regret I'd have with my mother, long before I could admit it existed. I didn't plan to stay long in that laundromat. I only went because I was out of clean shirts, and the small washer in my apartment had stopped working days earlier. It felt like one of those ordinary winter nights in Anchorage, the kind where everything is quiet and predictable. Nothing about that evening felt important. Nothing felt like a moment I would remember for the rest of my life. The man who sat near me didn't seem strange at first. He wore a thick winter jacket, a beanie pulled low on his forehead, and gloves that weren't warm enough for the cold outside. He kept his eyes on the washing machines for a long time before saying anything. I thought he was just another tired worker trying to finish the day. But there was something about the way he watched the spinning clothes, as if he was waiting for a specific second to happen, that made me pay attention. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm and steady. "Have you talked to your mother lately?" The question came out of nowhere, direct, simple, and sharper than it should have been. I felt something tighten in my chest, the same feeling I always had when someone mentioned her. I told him the truth in the shortest way possible. No, I hadn't. Things between us were complicated. He nodded like he already knew. And then he said, "You don't have as much time as you think." I remember wanting to leave right then. The lights were too bright, the room too warm, and his words too heavy for a stranger to say. But he didn't stop watching me with that tired, almost familiar look. I didn't know it that night, but the man sitting across from me had crossed more than miles to find me. He had crossed time. "Hi, my name is Andrew, and thank you for being here with me. If you enjoy stories about memories, time, and the moments we can't take back, I'd really appreciate if you subscribe to the channel." Have you ever wished you could go back and fix something small before it became something heavy? Let me know your thoughts. Thank you for listening. Now let's get back to the story. I didn't leave the laundromat right after that strange conversation. I probably should have, but something kept me sitting there, pretending to watch my clothes spin. The man stayed quiet for a while, just turning those metal tokens in his hand, one after another. Every few seconds, he looked at me the way people olham quando estão tentando medir se você está pronto para ouvir a verdade ou não. I remember shifting in my seat, uncomfortable, thinking he was just some lonely guy trying to start a conversation at the wrong time. Anchorage tinha muitos desses. Gente cansada, carregando suas próprias histórias silenciosas. "Look," I said, keeping my voice low, "I don't know you, and whatever you think you know about my mother, that's private." He didn't argue. He just nodded, como alguém que já tinha ouvido aquela frase muitas vezes antes. It annoyed me. I didn't want him to look so sure of himself. I wanted him to look wrong, but he didn't. Then he asked something simple. "When was the last time you talked to her?" My throat closed immediately. I looked away, pretending to check the dryer even though it was still running. "A while?" I said. "How long is a while?" he asked. I hated that question. People only ask it when they already know the answer is bad. I shrugged. "Months. Maybe more." He stayed silent again, and the machines kept shaking around us. The noise felt louder than before, como se aquele silêncio entre nós abrisse espaço para cada pequeno som da lavanderia. He finally put the tokens down on the bench between us and said, "She misses you more than you think." I felt a flash of anger rise in me. "You don't know anything about her," I snapped. "You don't even know her." He hesitated for the first time, a small, almost invisible hesitation. "I know enough," he said softly. "And I know she talks about you whenever she thinks no one's listening." That made me freeze. My mother never talked about her feelings openly, not even with me, especially not with me. He leaned back, letting his shoulders relax. "She keeps your old school photo in the drawer by the phone, the one where you're squinting because the sun was in your eyes." My whole body went still. That photo existed. She always said it wasn't a good one, mas nunca jogou fora. I only saw it when I helped her clean the living room during a holiday trip years ago. "How do you know that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't answer, not directly. Instead, he asked, "Why haven't you called her?" It was the kind of pergunta que corta mais do que deveria. I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out. The truth was simple. Pride. A conversa ruim que tivemos no ano anterior tinha ficado presa na minha cabeça. Nenhum de nós pediu desculpas. Nenhum de nós cedeu. And the longer we stayed apart, the harder it became to reach out. He must have seen the answer on my face because he nodded quietly, as if confirming something he had already predicted. "You think there's time," he said. "You think she'll always be there when you finally decide to fix things." He paused. "You're wrong." I felt a cold wave go through me, and it wasn't because of the door letting in the winter air. Something about the way he said it bothered me deeply. Not dramatic, not threatening, just certain. "Who are you?" I asked. "Seriously, who are you?" He lowered his eyes, and for a moment, he looked sad, deeply sad. "Someone who's seen what happens if you don't call," he said. I swallowed hard. My heart was beating faster than it should. I didn't know why his words felt heavier than the situation justified. People say things like that all the time, trying to push others to fix their mistakes. But there was something in his tone, something real. The dryer beeped, breaking the silence. I stood up quickly, só para ter alguma coisa para fazer, algum movimento que me afastasse da conversa. As I opened the dryer door, the warm air came out in a rush, and I felt my hands shaking a little. I pretended it was from the heat. When I turned back, he was watching me closely. "You still have a chance," he said, "but chances don't wait forever." I didn't have a response, not one that made sense. And for the first time that night, I felt something unexpected. The uncomfortable feeling that this stranger wasn't guessing. He was remembering. I folded my clothes slowly, trying to keep my hands steady. The man didn't move from his seat. He watched me with that same quiet patience, como se estivesse esperando eu terminar minhas tarefas antes de continuar a conversa. It made me uneasy. Anchorage era cheia de gente estranha, mas ninguém falava daquele jeito, como se estivesse voltando a lugar que já conhecia. When I finally sat back down, he shifted slightly, como quem toma coragem para continuar. "You think you're doing the right thing," he said, his voice calm. "You think giving her space is better than saying something you might regret." I felt my jaw tighten. "You don't know our situation," I said. "You don't know how she can be." He nodded. "She can be stubborn," he said. "Quiet when she's hurt. Slow to admit she misses someone, but she does." That stopped me again. He was describing her in a way that didn't sound like guesswork. It sounded like memory. "Seriously," I said. "How do you know her? Did she send you?" He shook his head. "No, she wouldn't do that. Not in this version." I frowned. "This version?" He closed his eyes for a moment, como se tivesse falado demais. "Forget I said that," he murmured. I leaned forward. "Look, if you know something I don't, just say it. Don't talk like you're reading lines from a fortune cookie." A small smile crossed his face. Sad, tired, the kind people give when they wish they could say everything but know they can't. I can't tell you everything, he said. Not yet, but I can tell you this. The distance between you two, it gets bigger, much bigger, and one day you'll wake up and realize that the last time you talked to her wasn't just months ago. It was years. I felt that sentence hit me harder than it should. She knows my number, I said weakly. If she wanted to talk, she did. He interrupted gently. More times than you think. For a second, my chest tightened. I hadn't heard her voice in a long time, and I kept telling myself it was mutual, that neither of us wanted to be the first to break the silence. But a part of me always wondered if that was true. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small object, not offering it to me, just holding it. It was a coin, not a regular one. The metal looked worn in a way I didn't recognize, and the edges were slightly uneven, como si tivesse sido feito à mão. I squinted at it. You ever seen one of these? He asked. No, I said. What is it? He turned it between his fingers. Something that doesn't exist yet, he said softly. Not here. Not now. I stared at him. Are you saying you're from the future? He didn't answer. Not in words, but the way he held the coin, the way he looked at it like it was a reminder of something lost, told me enough. I laughed, but it came out shaky. Okay, I said. Sure. You're from the future, and you came all the way here to talk about my mother? Yes, he said. No hesitation, no attempt to soften it. Exactly that. My breath caught. I expected him to smile, to reveal that it was some kind of joke, but he didn't. His expression stayed serious, almost pained. Why? I asked. He looked down at his hands for a long moment before speaking. Because you'll want another chance. And by the time you realize that, there won't be one. There was something in his voice, a crack so small most people wouldn't have noticed, but I did. It sounded like grief, not the kind you get from a stranger, but from someone who lived through something he couldn't fix. I swallowed hard. If this is real, I said slowly, if you're telling the truth, why me? Why not go to someone else? Why not fix something bigger? His eyes lifted to mine, steady and tired. Because some mistakes don't affect the world, he said. They affect only one person, and that's enough. I didn't know what to say. I didn't believe him. Not fully, but I couldn't ignore the way he spoke. There was no excitement, no performance, just that quiet certainty. Como alguém que já tinha tentado avisar antes. He stood up then, slowly, como si tivesse decidido que era hora. I'm here to give you a chance, he said. A small one, but it's yours. A chance for what? I asked. He hesitated, looked like he wanted to say more, then simply said, to choose differently, while you still can. I stared at him, trying to understand what he expected me to do with a sentence like that. Choose differently? About what? About who? I didn't want to ask. Didn't want to admit that I already knew the answer, deep down. My mother was the only topic that made my chest tighten that way. But hearing it from a stranger claiming to be from the future, felt unreal. He noticed my hesitation. I'm not here to scare you, he said quietly. I'm just telling you what's coming if nothing changes. And what's coming? I asked. His eyes lowered, and he took a slow breath. Silence. A long one, longer than you're ready for. That hit harder than anything else he'd said. It wasn't dramatic, wasn't loud, just a simple truth spoken like a memory. I pressed my hands against my legs to stop them from shaking. This doesn't make sense, I said. You talk like you know her, like you've talked to her recently. He didn't deny it. He just said, I've seen what the distance did to both of you. I let out a small laugh, mi de nervoso de que de humor. Right, so you're from the future, and you've been watching us? Not watching, he said. Living. I froze. That word felt too personal, too close. He seemed to realize he had said more than he meant to. He looked away, staring at the washing machines as if they could give him an easier version of this moment. You and your mother, you don't talk because you think you have time, but she thinks she's the problem. She thinks you pulled away because she failed you somehow. That made my stomach tighten. She said that. He nodded slowly. Many times. My throat felt thick. I looked down at my hands, and suddenly the laundromat felt smaller, like the air had gotten heavier. I didn't want this stranger to know these things. I didn't want him to have heard things I never heard myself. You should tell her she's wrong, he added, before it's too late. I rubbed my forehead. Why do you care so much? Why even bother coming here? He looked at me then, really looked, and there was something familiar in his eyes. Algo que eu não conseguia identificar totalmente. Because I know what it's like to run out of time, he said, and I don't want that for you. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the steady hum of the machines and the soft clang of the lone dryer door that never closed right. Outside, snow tapped lightly against the glass, and a cold draft slipped through the bottom of the entrance. You keep talking about time like it's something you've seen too much of, I said. Like you're older than you look. He didn't smile. I am, he said simply. I shook my head. You expect me to believe that? I don't expect anything from you, he replied. But I hope you listen. The dryer beeped again, someone else's machine, and the noise startled me out of the moment. A man wearing a thick parka walked in, grabbed his dry clothes, and left without saying a word. It reminded me of how normal life was supposed to feel. I stood up, needing space. Look, I don't know what you want me to do, I said. Call her? Apologize? Pretend like everything's fine? It's not that simple. He nodded calmly, following me with his eyes. I know, he said. You're right, it's not simple. But it's necessary. I walked a few steps toward the door, stopping near the vending machine. I turned back. If you really know the future, then tell me this. Does she forgive me? His face softened, a small, sad expression. She never stopped. The words hit me harder than anything else that night. I felt something close to pain in my chest. A part of me wanted to go home, pick up the phone, and call her right away. Another part, the stubborn one, pushed against it. He stood up slowly. Andrew, he said, speaking my name with a weight that made me pause. You still have time. Please don't waste it. I swallowed hard. Why do you care so much? He looked at me one more time, eyes tired, heavy with something I didn't recognize yet, and said, because I already lived the part where you regret it. I left the laundromat that night without looking back. I didn't want him to follow me, and for some reason, I felt like if I glanced over my shoulder, he'd be standing in the doorway, still watching me with those tired eyes. The cold air outside hit me hard, e eu respirei fundo para tentar pensar direito. Anchorage estava quieta, as ruas cobertas por uma fina camada de neve que brilhava sob as luzes dos postes. Everything felt normal, as if nothing strange had just happened. But inside, nothing felt normal. I walked to my truck, scraping the frost from the windshield with the edge of my sleeve. My hands were shaking a little, though I tried to blame it on the cold. I kept repeating what he said in my head, over and over. You still have time. It sounded like someone begging, not warning. E era isso que mais me incomodava. When I finally started the engine, the heater sputtered to life with its usual rattling noise. I sat there for a moment, letting the windshield clear. My mind kept drifting back to the question I had asked him, the one that slipped out before I could think. Does she forgive me? She never stopped. Those words hit something old inside me, something I had pushed down for years. Minha mãe e eu nunca fomos de demonstrações exageradas. Havia carinho, sim, mas também muito silêncio. Silence after arguments. Silence after misunderstandings. Silence that lasted longer than it should have. I put the truck into drive and headed home. The roads were slick and I had to keep both hands on the wheel. Even so, my thoughts kept sliding back to the same place. If what he said was true, if she talked about me, if she kept my old school photo, if she forgave me. Então por que eu ainda estava parado nesse orgulho estúpido? When I got home, the apartment felt colder than usual. I tossed the laundry basket on the couch and walked around without turning on any lights. For a long time, I just stood in the kitchen, staring at the phone on the counter. It looked different that night, like a door I had been avoiding. I picked up the receiver, held it, then put it down again. I repeated that cycle several times, como se o simples ato de tocar o telefone fosse admitir que ele tinha razão. I didn't want the traveler, whoever he was, to influence my decisions. But the truth was, it wasn't his words that were bothering me. It was the fact that deep down, I knew they were true. I went to bed late. Mas a mente não desligava. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's face. Not clearly, but just enough to feel the weight of the years since our last real conversation. It had been, what, a year and a half? 2 years? Time moved differently when you didn't look at it too closely. I fell asleep eventually, and when I woke up, it took me a moment to remember the laundromat, the traveler, the strange coin he held. It almost felt like a dream, until I saw my clean laundry still folded on the couch. That brought everything back. I made coffee, feeling the usual morning stiffness in my shoulders. I avoided the phone again, walking past it like it was something fragile I might break. I wanted to call her. I didn't want to call her. Both feelings pulled at me with equal strength. Around noon, I drove to work. I tried to focus on the usual tasks, checking inventory, answering a few calls, helping customers, but my mind kept drifting. Every quiet moment opened a space where his words slipped back in. During lunch, I sat alone at a small table near the window. Snow kept falling softly outside, barely making a sound. I stared at the street, wondering if that man, the traveler, was still somewhere in the city, watching, waiting. At one point, I checked the door reflexively, half expecting him to walk in, but he didn't. No sign of him anywhere. A parte racional de mim ficava aliviada. A outra parte, estranhamente decepcionada. By late afternoon, I realized something important. Even if I never saw him again, he had already changed something in me. Not a lot, but enough. That night, when I got home, I stood in the kitchen again, the phone only a few steps away. The room felt quiet, like it was waiting. I rubbed my hands together, took a breath, and reached for the phone. My hand stopped halfway. I wasn't ready. I put my hand down, walked away, and tried to tell myself that tomorrow would be different. But a small voice in my head, one that sounded a lot like his, whispered, "Time doesn't wait for you, Andrew." The next day started like any other. I woke up tired, made coffee, and tried not to think too much. But ignoring the thought of calling my mother had become harder than making the call itself. Every small silence of the morning felt like a reminder. Even the kitchen clock seemed louder. I tried distracting myself by cleaning the apartment, something I almost nunca fazia. I organized old papers, threw away receipts, wiped the counter. But no matter what I did, my eyes kept drifting toward the phone. At one point, I even unplugged it so I wouldn't hear it ring, even though it hadn't rung for weeks. I laughed at myself. I felt ridiculous. I was a grown man avoiding a phone like it was some kind of trap. But I told myself I'd call later, after work, when my mind was clearer. That was the story I used every day, and it always sounded convincing enough. At work, things were busy enough to keep me distracted. Customers came and went, and I talked just enough to keep my head from wandering. But small things hit me harder than they should. A woman around my mother's age asked me for help reaching something on a high shelf, and the way she smiled reminded me of a time minha mãe me pedia para buscar algo em cima da geladeira. I pushed the memory away quickly. By mid-afternoon, I started feeling something strange, like I was being watched. Not in a paranoid way, but in a familiar one. Como quando você sabe que alguém conhecido entrou num lugar antes mesmo de olhar para ele. I glanced toward the entrance several times, expecting to see the man from the laundromat, but he never came. Still, the feeling didn't leave. When my shift ended, I didn't go straight home. Instead, I drove around the city for a while. The streets were quiet, and the snow kept falling in a steady, soft curtain. Anchorage always felt small in winter, like the cold pulled everyone closer together. But even in that closeness, I felt alone. I drove past places I recognized. The small diner where my mother liked to eat on weekends, the old grocery store she used to visit, the church she went to on holidays. I hadn't been to any of those places with her in years. I felt a tightness in my chest each time I passed one, but I kept driving, como se o movimento fosse suficiente para adiar qualquer decisão. When I finally went home, I entered the apartment feeling heavier than before. I hung my coat, sat on the couch, and stared at the phone again. It was plugged back in. I didn't remember doing that. Maybe I had done it automatically. Maybe I wanted it plugged in and didn't want to admit that. I picked up the receiver once, held it, and put it down. Then again, and again. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. It felt like a door I was afraid to open. "I'll call tomorrow," I said out loud, trying to convince myself. But the words sounded weak, even to my own ears. I got up and walked to the kitchen. As I poured a glass of water, I caught my reflection in the small window above the sink. I looked older than I remembered, tired, avoiding something important. That's when I heard a soft knock at the door. My heart jumped. No one came to my apartment without warning. Not neighbors, not friends, not anyone. I walked slowly to the door, hesitating before opening it. When I did, a rush of cold air entered. And there he was, the traveler, standing in the hallway, like he had known exactly where I lived. His coat was dusted with snow, and his breath came out in small white clouds. He didn't look surprised to see me. He didn't look like he had been searching. He looked like he had been waiting. "We need to talk," he said. I stared at him, frozen. "How did you find me?" He gave a tired half smile. "Andrew, I've known where you lived for a long time." I stepped back a little. "What do you want now?" He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look angry. He just looked sad. "I'm here because you didn't call." My stomach dropped. I said I'd do it tomorrow. He shook his head. "Tomorrow isn't a promise, it's a hope, and you're running out of those." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "Why do you care so much? You don't even know me." But I knew, when he looked at me, really looked, that he wasn't just speaking as a traveler. He was speaking as someone who had lived the consequences. I stepped aside slowly, giving him enough room to walk in. He hesitated at the doorway for just a moment, como se estivesse entrando num lugar cheio de memórias que só ele lembrava. Then he removed his gloves, brushed the snow from his sleeves, and entered the apartment with a quiet familiarity that made my skin prickle. He looked around, not with curiosity, but with recognition, like he had been there before, maybe in another time, maybe in the version of life he kept mentioning. The idea made me uneasy. "Sit," I said, pointing to the couch. My voice sounded firmer than I felt. He sat down slowly, resting his hands on his knees. I stayed standing for a moment, unsure whether I wanted to be close or far away from him. Eventually, I sat in the chair across from him, keeping some distance. "You can't just follow me home," I said. "You can't show up like this." He nodded. "I know. I didn't want to. But you're running out of time." "You keep saying that," I muttered. "But you won't tell me why. If something's going to happen, then just say it." He looked at me with a softness that hurt more than anything else. "It's not one big moment, Andrew. It's 1,000 small ones. Choices you avoid, calls you don't make, words you swallow. Time doesn't hurt you all at once. It waits, and then one day, it closes." I swallowed hard. "So you're telling me she's sick?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he let out a slow breath. "She's tired," he said. "More tired than she lets on. She won't say it. She never does. But she's waiting for you." The room felt smaller. "If she needs me, why didn't she call?" He gave me a look that felt like a quiet truth hitting me in the chest. "She did." I froze. "No, she didn't. My phone." He shook his head. "Not recently. Not now. Back then. Before you stopped picking up. Before the last argument. She tried more than you think." My throat tightened. I looked away. I didn't want him to see how much that hurt. He continued, his voice low and steady. "She kept hoping you'd be the one to try next. But pride is a hard thing to set aside. For both of you." I rubbed my face with both hands, trying to make sense of everything. "You talk like you were there. Like you saw all this." He didn't deny it. He didn't confirm it either. But the silence between us said enough. "Why does it matter so much to you?" I finally asked. "Why do you care about what happens between me and my mother?" He looked down at his hands for a long moment. "Because I lived the version where you didn't fix it," he said quietly. "And it's not something I want you to go through." A chill went through me. "What does that mean?" He lifted his eyes to mine. "It means I know what happens when you wait too long." I leaned back, my pulse quickening. "Something happens to her." His expression shifted. Not fear, not pity, but something deeper. Something like grief. "Andrew, you know how life is. Nothing stays the same forever. People get tired, hearts get heavy. Time moves even when we don't." I shook my head. "That's not an answer. It's the only one I can give without taking something from you," he said. "You need to make this choice yourself." I didn't understand what he meant, and that made everything worse. "If you know something, tell me. If there's something wrong with her, tell me." He sighed, and for the first time, he looked older than the face he carried. "There are rules to this. I can't change certain things. I can only guide you." "Guide me to what?" I whispered. He hesitated, the same way someone hesitates before saying something painful. "To the moment where you choose not to lose her." The room went silent. Only the distant hum of the heater filled the space. "That moment is coming," he added. "Sooner than you think." I felt a slow, trembling breath leave my chest. "And if I call her now?" He nodded softly. That's the start. I looked at the phone again. The same phone I had avoided for months. It suddenly felt like the heaviest object in the room. He stood up. I'll go, he said. You don't need me here for this part. I followed him to the door. Will I see you again? He paused, hand on the doorknob. Only if you don't call. I froze. And then he walked out into the cold hallway, leaving me alone with the one decision I had been avoiding for years. I locked the door after he left, but I didn't move from the spot. Fiqué lá parado, with my hand still on the lock, listening to the silence of the apartment. It felt different now, like the air was waiting for me to make a decision, and every second I stood there was another second proving that I wasn't ready. Eventually I stepped away from the door and walked back to the living room. The phone was sitting on the counter, quiet, normal, harmless. It looked like any other phone from the 90s. Pasado, confio enrolado, de plastico beige, slightly yellowed with age. But to me, it felt like a test I kept failing. I sat on the couch and stared at it for a long time. I must have looked ridiculous, a grown man sitting in a dark room, staring at an object como si él fosse morter. But that's what guilt does. It makes simple things heavy. I tried finding excuses again. Maybe she was busy. Maybe she didn't want to talk. Maybe things were better left alone. Those thoughts were familiar, worn out from years of use, but they weren't convincing anymore. His words stayed in my head. Only if you don't call. That line bothered me more than everything else he said. It wasn't a threat. It was almost disappointed, like he already knew which choice I'd make. I rubbed my face and leaned forward, elbows on my knees. Just call, I muttered. It's just a call. But I didn't move. Time passed. I don't know how long. Minutes? Hours? The room got colder. I turned on the small lamp near the couch, mais por reflexo do que por vontade. The soft light made the place look small, almost fragile. Finally, I stood up. My legs felt heavy, but I walked to the counter anyway. I placed my hand on the phone, and for the first time in a long while, I lifted the receiver. But before I could dial anything, the phone rang. The sudden sound made me jump. I stared at the receiver in my hand, frozen. It never rang. Not once in the last few weeks, maybe even months. The ringing echoed through the apartment like something out of place. I almost dropped the receiver. I forced myself to lift it to my ear. Hello? At first, there was only static, a soft crackle, like an old radio trying to find a station. Then a voice, a familiar one, gentle, older, tired. Andrew? My heart stopped. It was her. Mom, I said, my voice breaking a little. She let out a soft breath. Como si tivesse segurando o ar antes de falar. I didn't mean to call so late, she said. I couldn't sleep. I swallowed hard. It's okay, I whispered. I'm glad you called. She paused. You sound different. I'm okay, I said, though it wasn't true. Just surprised. Another pause. I could almost imagine her sitting in her small living room, hands folded, talking with that careful tone she used when she wasn't sure if she was welcome. I didn't want you to think I was bothering you, she said. You're not, I said quickly. You never were. Silence again. A soft one. Not uncomfortable, just full of things we hadn't said in years. I miss you, she said. My throat tightened. I miss you too. It felt like a weight falling off my chest, but at the same time a new one replacing it. The weight of everything I could have said sooner. She took a shaky breath. I know things haven't been easy between us. I know I made mistakes. No, I said, shaking my head, even though she couldn't see it. It wasn't just you. I should have tried harder. I should have called. She didn't argue. She never did when it came to emotions. We can talk now, she said softly. If you want. I want, I said. I really do. We talked for a while, about small things, how cold the winter was, how her garden didn't survive the frost that year, how she still listened to the same old radio station every morning. It wasn't much, but it felt like air after being underwater. Eventually, her voice got softer. Andrew, I don't stay up this late usually. I should rest. Of course, I said. Call me tomorrow, or I'll call you. Either way. She let out a warm, tired breath. I'd like that. We said goodnight. When I hung up, I stood there for a moment with the receiver still in my hand. Something felt different in the room. Lighter, like a door had opened, But that feeling didn't last long, because as soon as I placed the receiver down, there was a knock at my door. Soft, familiar. I didn't even need to open it to know who it was. The traveler had returned. I walked to the door slowly this time. Not afraid, just unsure. A few minutes before, I had finally talked to my mother after years of silence. The conversation had left my chest warm and shaken ao mesmo tempo. And now, right after that call, ela estava ali de novo, como se soubesse exatamente quando aparecer. I opened the door. John stood in the hallway, though I still didn't know his name. Not yet. Snow clung to his shoulders, and his breath fogged the air. He didn't look surprised to see me. Nem parecia compressa. He just looked relieved. "You called," he said softly. Something in the way he said it made my breath catch. He looked at me like someone que tinha esperado por esse momento por muito tempo. "Yes," I said. I called." He nodded once, like he was marking that moment in his mind. "Good." I stepped aside again, but he didn't walk in right away. Instead, he looked at me for a long moment. His eyes were a little red, as if he had been crying earlier, though he didn't seem like someone who cried easily. "You changed something today," he said. "More than you realize." I didn't know how to respond. I leaned against the doorframe and crossed my arms. "Did you know she was going to call?" He hesitated. "I hoped she would," he said. "She always tried first, in every version." That word again. Version. I wanted to ask him what it meant, but there were bigger questions pressing against my tongue. "What happens now?" I asked. He looked down at the floor, como si estivesse escolhendo as palavras com cuidado. "Now you keep talking to her. That's the important part." I nodded slowly. "I can do that." "Will you?" he asked. The question wasn't sarcastic or accusatory. It was real. A pergunta de alguém que tinha visto eu falhar antes. "Yes," I said. "I will." He finally stepped inside. He closed the door behind him, but ficou perto dela, como se não planejasse ficar muito tempo. "You sound different," he said. "Lighter." "I feel different," I replied. Talking to her. It felt good. Strange, but good. He gave a small smile, the first genuine one I had seen on his face. For a moment, he looked younger, or maybe less tired. "That call meant everything," he said quietly. Something inside me twisted. "To her?" "To you," he corrected gently. I let out a breath. "You talk like you know both of us better than we know ourselves." He didn't answer directly. Instead, he walked around the room slowly, looking at the small details. The photos on the shelf, the old clock on the wall, a jacket I had thrown over the chair. He wasn't judging anything. Parecia nostálgico, like someone revisiting a place que já não existe mais no tempo dele. I watched him closely. Every movement felt personal, familiar, and it bothered me. "Tell me the truth," I said. "Do you know my mother?" He stopped near the window. Snowflakes tapped lightly against the glass. He kept his back to me, shoulders heavy. "Yes," he said. My heart jumped. "How? Who are you to her?" He turned slowly, and for the first time his eyes were glassy. Not from the cold, from something else, something deeper. "I've been in her life," he said. "Longer than you know." I stepped closer. "What does that mean?" He didn't look away. "I need you to understand something before we talk about who I am. Your mother, she always hoped things would get better between you two. She never stopped waiting for that call. Not once. I felt that like a punch. She said she missed me. She did," he whispered. "You have no idea how much." My eyes stung a little, and I looked away, pretending to rub my face. "Why are you telling me all this? Why do you care so much?" He swallowed, hard, because I saw the day she stopped waiting. I froze. "What day?" I whispered. He shook his head. "Not today, not now. You don't need that pain. You just need to know there's still time, if you keep choosing her." I could barely breathe. "You talk like you were there." "I was," he said. His voice cracked, just a little, enough to tell me that whatever he had lived, it hurt him deeply. I stepped closer. "Who are you?" He opened his mouth to answer, but hesitated. He looked at the floor, then back at me, as if fighting with himself. "Soon," he said. "Not tonight, but soon." I clenched my jaw. "Why not now?" "Because tonight should belong to her," he replied softly. "Not to me." I didn't know what that meant. But something told me he wasn't wrong. He put his gloves back on, walked to the door, and paused with his hand on the knob. "I'm glad you called her," he said quietly. "I wish you had done it sooner, but I'm glad you did it now." And then he stepped into the hallway. Before I could say anything else, he added, "You'll understand everything soon, Andrew. I promise." Then he walked away. And for the first time that night, I felt a strange mix of relief and fear. Relief for the call, and fear for what he still wasn't telling me. I closed the door after he left, but this time I didn't feel confused the way I had before. I felt shaken, yes, but also strangely calm, like the weight I'd been carrying for years had shifted. Mesmo que so un poco. Still, something about the traveler's visit that night bothered me more than anything he had said earlier. He knew too much. Not just about my mother, about me, about the apartment, about the way I lived. It didn't make sense. Not yet. I walked to the couch and sat down slowly, trying to make sense of everything. The room felt quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet I'd felt earlier. This time, the silence didn't feel like guilt. It felt like expectation, as if the whole night had been pushing me towards something I still didn't understand. I looked at the phone again. "Call her tomorrow," I whispered, but I stopped myself. No, I would call her in the morning, not tomorrow. Morning. I didn't want to fall back into old habits, where amanhã podia virar mês que vem. Still, my mind kept returning to his last words. "I wish you had done it sooner." Why would he say that like he felt the pain himself? I leaned back and shut my eyes for a moment. The exhaustion of the day finally hit me. Not physical exhaustion, emotional. It felt like I had been carrying a heavy box for years without noticing, and tonight someone finally told me to put it down. When I finally dozed off on the couch, my sleep was light, cheia de pequenos flashes de conversa com minha mãe. The way her voice trembled a little at first, the way it softened when we talked about simple things, the way she said goodnight like it mattered. I woke up early the next morning. Antes mesmo do sol nascer. Anchorage estava azulada lá fora, aquele tom frio de inverno que parece morder o ar. I made coffee and stood by the window for a while, watching the quiet street. And then something strange happened. I saw a man walking down the sidewalk, hands in his coat pockets, snow gathering on his shoulders. His posture was familiar, too familiar. I leaned closer to the window, squinting. It was him, John, though I didn't know the name yet, walking alone in the early morning cold. He wasn't looking around. He wasn't searching for anyone. Ele caminhava como alguém perdido em pensamentos pesados, like someone who had lived something difficult just hours earlier. He didn't see me, but I studied him carefully, for the first time sem o receio de ontem. And something clicked. It wasn't his face, though something about it felt strangely close to home. It wasn't his voice either, though now that I replayed it in my mind, it sounded warmer than it should have for a complete stranger. It was the way he walked, slow, thoughtful, como aquele leve desvio no passo direito, hábito antigo que eu reconhecia, mesmo sem querer. My heart stopped. Meu irmão tinha aquele mesmo desvio no passo. Pequeno, quase imperceptível, resultado de uma queda que ele levou quando era adolescente. Only family noticed it. Even friends rarely did. I stepped back from the window, breathing hard. "No," I whispered. "That's impossible." John had been older than me. The traveler was older too. 6 years, maybe 7. The math, and the posture, and the way he talked about my mother. I felt my stomach twist. I grabbed my coat, I wasn't sure why, and stepped outside. Maybe I planned to call him out. Maybe I wanted to see him up close again. Maybe I just needed to confirm the impossible thought growing in my chest. But by the time I reached the sidewalk, he was gone, as if the snow had swallowed him. I stood there in the cold, breath fogging the air, heart pounding. Why didn't I see it before? I murmured. The pieces were there, scattered, but real. The traveler knew too much about my mother, too much about me, too much about how our family worked, and the grief in his voice. It wasn't the grief of a stranger. It was the grief of someone who had lived the same story from another angle. Someone who had stayed while I walked away. Someone who had seen her waiting. Someone who had carried the weight I was only now starting to understand. The thought finally landed, heavy and undeniable. The traveler wasn't just someone from the future. He was someone from my future, and not just anyone. John. I whispered into the cold air. My brother. It had to be him. And suddenly, the story he wasn't telling became louder than everything he had said. He wasn't here to warn me about time. He was here to fix the thing that haunted him the most. I walked back into my apartment feeling like something had shifted inside me. The living room, the folded laundry, the quiet heater hum, everything looked the same, but none of it felt the same. It was as if the world had moved slightly, silently, while I was gone. I closed the door and just stood there, letting the weight of what I had seen settle into my chest. I replayed the moment outside again and again, the traveler walking down the early morning street, his breath fogging the cold air, his pace slow and familiar. I had watched him from my window like someone watching a memory take shape. It wasn't fear I felt. It was recognition. Quiet, undeniable recognition. That gentle shift in the right leg. That almost invisible hesitation before each step. A habit formed decades ago from an old injury my brother got as a teenager. I hadn't thought about that in years. But once I saw it in the traveler, everything I had ignored suddenly snapped into place. I sat down on the couch, elbows on my knees, trying to breathe through the rush of thoughts. It didn't make sense at first. It didn't feel possible. But the more I replayed his words, the ones heavy with things he shouldn't have known, the more impossible it was to deny. He hadn't spoken like a stranger at all. He had spoken like someone who knew the shape of my life, like someone who had lived inside the same family silence I did. The way he described Mom, not guessing, but remembering. The way he said my name, not curious but familiar. The quiet grief in his voice, not sympathy, but experience. He didn't look at me the way a stranger would. He looked at me the way John used to, with that mix of worry and patience he never knew how to hide. I rubbed my face slowly, trying to steady my breathing. I didn't want to believe it, but everything pointed to the same truth. The traveler wasn't warning me from a distance. He was trying to save me from something he had already lived. I got up and walked toward the drawer where I kept old photographs. A thin layer of dust covered the lid. I hadn't opened it in months, maybe years. I pulled the box out and set it on the floor. The pictures were scattered and unorganized, just snapshots of holidays, birthdays, and forgotten afternoons. Then I found it. The photo of us standing in the yard behind our childhood home. I was 13, John was 19. His right foot angled slightly inward, the old scar hidden under his jeans. That subtle posture, that old injury, it was the same one I saw in the traveler's steps that morning. My hand tightened around the picture. It was him, the traveler, the man who knew too much, the man who spoke like he had lived inside my regrets, was my brother. My throat tightened, and I had to sit back on my heels. A wave of emotion hit me, not fear, not shock, but something heavier, something like grief mixed with relief. If it truly was John, then everything he said carried a different weight. He wasn't just warning me about life. He was telling me pieces of a future that had already hurt him. I stared at the photograph again, feeling a tug in my chest. John had always been the steady one, older, calmer, quieter. When Dad left, he picked up responsibilities no 19-year-old should. When Mom and I fought, he always tried to be the bridge between us. And now, somehow, he had crossed time itself to try again. I sat on the floor for a long time, holding that picture, letting the truth settle. When I finally stood, I felt a strange clarity wash through me. I didn't fully understand the mechanics of time travel or what rules he had to follow, but I understood this much. He wouldn't have come back unless something in the future had broken badly. I grabbed my coat. I didn't know where he was, but I knew where he would go. John never rushed through decisions. He always waited, and he always waited in quiet places. So I stepped outside into the cold morning air, hoping the timeline hadn't taken him away yet. I didn't know what I would say when I found him, but I knew I had to find him. Because John had always waited for me, even when I didn't deserve it. I followed the cold air back outside, my breath turning white as soon as I stepped onto the sidewalk. Anchorage was still waking up, the sky stuck in that pale winter blue that comes right before the sun fully rises. Everything felt quiet, soft, untouched. But inside, I felt restless. I didn't know where John was. I only knew he couldn't have gone far. John never walked away fast when something was unfinished. Not when we were kids, not when Mom needed him, and not now. when he had traveled farther than anyone ever could. I walked down the street without a real direction, just following instinct and memory. The cold bit at my hands, even through my gloves, and the wind carried that dry sound of snow brushing across empty pavement. Every few steps I looked around, half hoping I'd see his coat or the outline of his familiar walk. Nothing, just the quiet morning and empty sidewalks. I passed the small grocery store Mom used to like, then the post office, then the bus stop near my building. Each place felt heavy with old moments, things John and I used to do together without thinking. Now every street corner felt like it was echoing with the truth I had just discovered. And then it hit me. He didn't come back to this time to disappear into the city. He came back to be found. By me. I turned around and headed toward the laundromat. It was the only place that made sense. The place where he first approached me. The place where he knew I'd listen, even if I pretended not to. By the time I reached the building, the open 24 hours sign buzzed faintly in the window. The glass was still fogged from the heat inside. I pushed the door open, and a wave of warmth and detergent washed over me. And there he was, sitting on the same bench, hands folded, shoulders slightly hunched the way John always sat when he was thinking too much. He lifted his head slowly when he heard the door, and his expression softened. "You came," he said. "Yes," I answered, though it felt like the simplest word for something much bigger. He nodded like he expected it, like he had been sitting there waiting for me to catch up with a truth he had known from the beginning. He motioned for me to sit next to him, so I did, not too close, not too far. It was the same distance we had always kept growing up, a kind of quiet middle ground between stubbornness and love. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The machines filled the silence for us, their steady humming almost comforting. Then I asked the question that had been burning since the moment I saw him outside my window. "John, is it really you?" He looked down at his hands, the same hands that bandaged my knees when I fell off my bike, the same hands that held the steering wheel the first time he taught me to drive. When he finally looked up again, his eyes were full of something I hadn't seen before, a mix of honesty and exhaustion. "Yes," he said quietly. "It's me." My chest tightened. Even hearing it directly didn't prepare me for the weight of it. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked. "Because you had to see it," he replied. "If I told you right away, you would have pushed harder. You would have tried to prove me wrong. And this isn't something to fight against. It's something to understand." I nodded slowly, accepting it even as it hurt. "So why come back? Why time travel? Why go through all of that just to talk to me here? In a laundromat?" John let out a breath, shoulders lowering. "Because I lived the version where you never called her," he said. "I lived the version where regret shaped your whole life, and I couldn't stand watching you carry that weight anymore." I swallowed hard. "You saw all of it?" "I saw more than you'll ever know," he said. "I saw you trying to fix things you couldn't fix. I saw you shut down. I saw you avoid the world. I saw you turn into someone you didn't recognize, and someone I couldn't reach. I felt something inside me crack, not breaking, just opening." "And you think this changes everything?" I asked. His eyes softened. "I don't think," he said. "I know. One call can change the shape of an entire life." We sat in silence again, the weight of his words settling into the air between us. He was right. Somehow, I already knew he was right. He stood up slowly, as if he had gathered enough courage for the next part. "There's more you need to know," he said. "Not about Mom, about me." I stood too, my heart tightening. "What about you?" John looked at me with a faint, tired sadness. A sadness shaped by years I hadn't lived yet. "You're wondering how far I came from," he said softly, "and why I came back alone." I felt a cold ripple move through me. "What happened to you?" I whispered. John took a breath, the kind someone takes before telling the truth that hurts the most. "That," he said quietly, "is what you need to understand next." John didn't speak right away. He stood there in the laundromat, his eyes on the window as if he was watching something far away. Not outside, but somewhere in time. The early light coming through the glass made him look older, tired in a way I didn't recognize from my real brother. Not physically older, but emotionally worn out. Someone who had lived through more than he ever planned to carry. He finally turned back to me. "We're not finished yet," he said. That sentence alone made something tighten in my chest. John never used that tone unless something important was coming. When we were kids, it usually meant he knew more than I did. Now it sounded heavier, like he was preparing me for something neither of us could avoid. I shifted on the bench. What else is there? You already told me what happens if I don't change. You already told me why you came back. John shook his head slowly. You don't know everything yet. Not the part that matters most. I waited, heart beating faster than I wanted to admit. He took a small step forward and leaned on one of the washing machines, the metal vibrating softly under his hand. In my timeline, after Mom, after things went the way they went, you and I drifted apart. I frowned. We did? Why? He let out a quiet breath. Because you blamed me. The words hit harder than I expected. Blamed you for what? For being the one who stayed, he answered. For being there when you weren't. For carrying things you never saw. And later, for reminding you of the final days you missed. My throat tightened. I didn't know what to say. I tried to help you, he continued. I really tried. For years. But guilt is a heavy thing. It makes you push away the people who love you because they remind you of the part you can't fix. He paused, then added even quieter, you pushed me away too. I lowered my eyes. I didn't want to picture the version of myself he was describing. A version that collapsed under its own weight. A version he had to watch break. And after you shut down, John said, I kept thinking, maybe if I had warned you earlier, maybe if I had pushed harder, maybe if I had found a way to reach you sooner, things might have been different. My chest hurt. John, you didn't have to carry that. He looked at me with an expression I knew too well. Stubborn, protective, a little heartbroken. I carried it because you couldn't. That's what older brothers do. I had to sit down again. My hands were shaking a little. John walked closer, his steps slow but steady, the familiar right leg shift still there. He sat beside me, leaving only a few inches between us. Calling her changed everything, he said quietly. You don't understand how big that is yet, but it's the moment you spent your whole future wishing you could go back to. I swallowed hard, my voice unsteady. I didn't know she'd call me last night. I didn't know she was... I couldn't finish the sentence. You weren't supposed to know, John said. You were supposed to feel it. He pressed his palm against his chest. Here, before time ran out. We sat there for a moment, just listening to the hum of the machines. A soft clicking sound filled the room, the steady rhythm of coins settling inside the dryer. It felt almost like a heartbeat, steady, patient, reminding me of something important. Finally, I looked up at him. John, how much time did I have left? Back in your timeline? He hesitated. That alone told me the truth. Not enough, he said. Not enough to say what you needed. Not enough to hear what she wanted to tell you. Not enough to forgive yourself. A sharp ache went through me, and I turned away, blinking hard. That's why I came back, he added. Not to change the world. Not to erase the pain. Just to give you the one moment you never got to have. I let out a shaky breath. Thank you for giving me that. John nodded, but he wasn't finished. There's something else, he said. Something you haven't asked yet. I looked at him, confused. What? His eyes softened, tired, gentle, quietly broken. You're wondering how far I came from, he said, and why I traveled back alone. My stomach dropped. John, I whispered, what happened to you? He took a long, steady breath. That, he said softly, is what you need to understand next. John didn't answer right away. He stood there with his eyes lowered, like someone rehearsing a truth he wasn't ready to say out loud. The machines hummed around us, steady and patient, but the silence between us felt heavier than anything in the room. Andrew, he said finally, in the future I came from, things didn't go well for me. That stopped me cold. For you? I asked. What does that have to do with all this? John rubbed his hands together slowly, a nervous habit he rarely showed when we were younger. He looked older in that moment, not in the face, but in the weight he carried. It has everything to do with it, he said. He walked a few steps away, stopping near one of the dryers. He rested his palm on the warm metal surface, like the steady vibration grounded him. For a moment I thought he might back out of the conversation entirely, but he didn't. When Mom died, he began, voice low and steady. It changed both of us, but the way it changed me, and the way it changed you, those paths didn't line up. I tried to swallow, but the air felt thick. I know it would have hit me hard, but you didn't just take it hard, John said, turning toward me. You broke under it. I stood frozen. The way he said it, quiet, honest, unprotected, made my stomach twist. You stopped working for a while. You stopped calling anyone back. You slept during the day and stayed awake at night. You replayed every conversation you ever had with her. You replayed the silence too. His voice trembled slightly, and you blamed yourself for all of it. I looked down. I didn't want to imagine that version of myself, but some part of me recognized him, a shadow I could have become without even noticing. I tried to help you, John said, for years. But grief makes you hide, Andrew. And guilt makes you believe you deserve the hiding. I felt something break open inside me. Not pain exactly, but a raw truth I had never said out loud. In my timeline, John continued, you kept telling me the same thing, again and again. I lifted my eyes. What did I tell you? He looked away, and the answer came out quiet and broken. That you wished you could go back. Just once. Just to make a different choice. My chest tightened so hard I had to sit down. I sat on the edge of the bench, elbows on my knees, trying to breathe. John remained standing for a moment, watching me with eyes that carried years of exhaustion. When the opportunity to travel came, he said, I didn't think about myself. I didn't think about the rules or the danger or the cost. I just thought about you. And about Mom. I ran my hands over my face. What do you mean the cost? What did it do to you? John's silence was the only answer I needed, but he explained anyway. Time travel isn't clean, he said quietly. It's not polished. It's not safe. Movies make it look like stepping through a door. But in reality, it takes something from you each time you move through it. What does it take? I asked. Time, he said. My time. I stared at him. The words didn't make sense at first, and then they made too much sense. My body wasn't made to stay in a different time period. Not for long. The longer I'm here, the more it drains me. The more it tries to send me back, or erase the part of me that doesn't belong here. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. You knew this before coming here, I whispered. You knew you were risking your own time. He nodded, and I still came. Why, John? Why would you do that? He looked at me, really looked, and for a moment he wasn't a traveler or a stranger or a man out of place. He was my brother again, the same brother who stood up for me in school, who taught me how to drive, who held the family together when I didn't know how. Because I know what losing you feels like, he said softly. I lived that, and I couldn't let another version of our family fall the same way. I felt tears rising but forced them back. John walked closer and placed a hand on my shoulder. Warm, steady, familiar. You don't become that version here, he said. That's why I came back, to protect the version of you that still has a chance. I took a shaky breath. And what about you? What happens to you? John didn't answer right away. His eyes slid toward the window again, toward the pale morning light that made the edges of his silhouette look softer, thinner. I can't stay in this time, he said, and the part of me that came back doesn't have much left. A cold tightness settled in my chest. John, I whispered. He squeezed my shoulder gently. I didn't come here to stay. I came to make sure you would. I closed my eyes, and a single tear escaped. John didn't say anything more. He didn't need to. Because for the first time since meeting the traveler, I finally understood the truth he had been carrying. He wasn't just here to save me from regret. He was here because he was running out of time himself. John's words hung between us like cold air that wouldn't move. I felt them settle slowly, heavily, as if they were trying to sink into my chest 1 inch at a time. For a moment, I couldn't even speak. I just stared at him, trying to understand the shape of what he had confessed. You don't have much time, I repeated quietly. John, what does that really mean? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked down at his hands, turning them slowly as if he could see the time he had lost written in his skin. When he finally looked up, his expression was calm. Too calm for what he was about to say. It means I wasn't supposed to stay here this long, he said. The body isn't meant to live outside its timeline. Not for more than a short window. The longer I'm here, the more it pulls at me. Drains me. Drains you how? I asked. Time, he repeated softly. My own time. My years. My strength. My stomach twisted. The idea didn't feel like science fiction anymore. It felt real. Painfully real. Now that I could hear how tired he sounded. You knew this before you came? I said, my voice shaking. You knew traveling would hurt you? Of course I did, John said almost gently. But I also knew what would happen to you if I didn't. I looked down at the floor, pressing my hands together to stop them from shaking. So you did all this, knowing you'd lose time of your own life? He let out a soft exhale. You're my brother, Andrew. I wasn't going to watch you fall apart again. The word again cut deeper than anything else. John moved closer, taking a seat across from me. The machines hummed and clicked behind him, steady and rhythmic, like a reminder that the world outside our conversation still existed, even if it felt far away. In the future I came from, he said, you didn't just carry regret. You lived inside it every day. You carried it until there wasn't room for anything else. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice lowered. And I lost you long before time took either of us. I swallowed hard. John, don't say that. But it's true, he said quietly. You stopped letting people in. You stopped letting me in. And I spent years trying to pull you back to the surface. My throat tightened. Hearing the way he said years made my chest ache. Years he watched me sink. Years he carried the weight for both of us. And when the chance came to travel, he continued, I didn't think twice. I didn't care about the risks. I just thought, if I can give him one moment back, one moment he always wished for, maybe everything changes. I wiped at my face without thinking. You risked your life just for that moment? John shook his head. No, I risked it for you. Because the version of you I knew wasn't living anymore. He was just surviving. A quiet silence settled between us. I felt something break open inside me. Not a sharp pain, but a slow, hollow ache. The kind that comes when someone tells you a truth you already sensed, but never admitted. And you think this version of me is different? I asked. I don't think, he said softly. I know. You called her. That alone means everything. He stood slowly, as if the movement required more from him than it should have. He walked toward the window, where the pale morning light spilled across the floor. When he stepped into it, something in his outline shifted, just slightly, like the world was struggling to decide whether he belonged in that space. I felt my chest rise sharply. John, what's happening to you? He turned, and for a second I saw it, the faint thinning of his form in the light, the way the colors around him looked a little too bright, the way his shadow didn't land exactly where it should. I told you, he said, I'm not meant to stay here. Every minute I stay costs me another minute from where I came. I stood up too quickly, the bench scraping beneath me. Then stop, John, stop, go back. You've already done enough. He stepped toward me, and for a moment he looked almost like his younger self, the brother who always carried more than he let on. No, he said gently. I haven't. There was one more thing you needed to hear. What? I asked. John placed a hand on my shoulder, warm, familiar, steady, that I'm not afraid. His voice cracked just slightly. I didn't come here to save myself. I came here to give you the chance I always wished you had, and I'd make the same choice again. I felt tears blur my vision. John, I don't want to lose you. He smiled softly, a tired smile full of love. You won't. Not the way I lost you. The machines clicked behind us, a soft mechanical heartbeat, and I could feel the truth settling into the room. John wasn't just here to save me from regret. He was here because he had already lived the version where he lost his brother, and he refused to let that be the only version of our story. John didn't speak for a while. He stood there with his hand still resting on my shoulder, the warmth of it steady and familiar. But something about that moment felt fragile, like if I blinked, if I looked away for even a second, he might not be standing there anymore. The laundromat lights buzzed softly above us. The machines kept turning. The world kept moving in its small, ordinary way, but inside that room time felt thinner, stretched to its limit, held together only by the seconds John still had left. He took a slow breath. Andrew, there's something you need to hear before I go. I felt my heart sink. You don't have to go yet, just wait, just sit with me. 5 more minutes. He shook his head. I can't. Staying longer will only make things harder, for both of us. He stepped back just a little, and I could see it again. The faint shimmer around him, the light pulling at the edges of his outline. His form wasn't disappearing fast, but it wasn't solid either. It reminded me of breath on cold glass, there, then fading. John, I whispered, don't do this. Not like this. He gave me a look full of patience and sad understanding. "I didn't choose the way it ends," he said. "I only chose where it could change." My throat tightened. "Then tell me what I'm supposed to do now." He reached out gently, placing a hand on the back of my neck, the way he used to when he wanted me to really listen. "Go see her," he said. "Not next week, not someday, now. Don't run from this. Don't hide behind excuses. Just go." A tear slipped down my cheek. I didn't bother wiping it away. "I will, I promise." He nodded once, like that promise mattered more than anything else he'd done here. Good. That's all I wanted. The room felt heavier as silence settled again. I could hear my own breathing now, shaky and uneven. John glanced around the laundromat as if he was memorizing it, or maybe letting it go. His eyes softened when they landed back on me. "You know," he said quietly, "there were so many nights in the future when I wished I could talk to you like this. Not to lecture you, just to be your brother again. To sit beside you without the walls you built around yourself." My chest tightened painfully. "I'm sorry," I said, voice trembling, "for what I become there, for what you had to carry, for all of it." John shook his head gently. "Don't apologize for a version of you that won't exist anymore." He paused. "You already changed the path." He was right, even if I didn't feel worthy of that forgiveness yet. A soft light flickered from the window. John's form dimmed slightly, just for a moment, as if time were tugging at him again. He steadied himself, but I could see the effort it cost him. "How much time do you have left?" I asked. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he gave a small, tired smile. "Enough to say goodbye." The word hit me like a blow. "No," I said quickly. "Don't say it. Please don't say it." He stepped closer and pulled me into a brief, tight hug. The kind of hug he rarely gave when we were younger, but always meant something when he did. His breath shook once against my shoulder before he pulled back. "You're going to be okay," he said. "And Mom, she'll be okay too, because this time you'll be there." My eyes filled again, blurring his outline. "John, I don't want to lose you." "You won't," he said softly. "Not the way I lost you. I'll still be part of you. The memories, the warnings, the love. You carry all of that forward." He stepped back into the faint morning light, and that's when it happened. Not a flash, not a sudden disappearance, no dramatic noise or bright effect. He simply began to fade, quietly, gently, like a photograph left too long in the sun. His form thinned, the colors softened, the outline blurred. I tried to reach out, but my hand passed through him like air. "John!" I cried. He looked at me one last time, eyes calm, steady, peaceful, a small nod, a silent, "It's okay," and then he was gone. The laundromat was still. The machines hummed, the lights buzzed, but something in the room felt different, lighter, quieter, almost sacred. I sat down on the bench he had been sitting on minutes earlier. The warmth was gone, but the weight of his words, of his visit, of his sacrifice, stayed with me like something permanent. When I finally stood and stepped outside, Anchorage was fully awake. The cold air stung my face, but I didn't mind. For the first time in a long time, I felt a direction inside me, clear, steady, undeniable. John wasn't here anymore, but his message was, and I knew exactly where I needed to go next. I stayed in the laundromat long after John faded. The machines kept spinning, the lights kept buzzing, and the coins kept rattling inside the dispensers. Nothing around me reacted to what had happened, as if time had simply continued the way it always does, steady, indifferent, unaware. But inside me, something had shifted for good. I sat on the same bench where John had been only minutes before. I kept waiting to feel a trace of him in the air. Some warmth, some echo, some sign that he had truly been there. But the room held nothing except a quiet that felt different now. Not heavy, not suffocating, just open, like something had been set down gently and no longer needed to be carried. When I finally stepped outside, the morning had fully arrived. The sky was brighter, the cold sharper. Anchorage looked the same as every other winter morning, but I didn't feel the same walking through it. John's words followed me all the way home. Soft, steady reminders of everything he had lived so I wouldn't. Back at my apartment, the phone sat on the counter where I had left it. It looked simple, ordinary, harmless. For years it had felt like a barrier, something I avoided because of fear and pride. But now it felt like a lifeline. A few hours later, I packed a small bag and got into my truck. The roads were still icy, but the drive didn't scare me. It felt right, necessary. I didn't know exactly what I'd say when I saw my mother. I didn't know how she'd react. I didn't know how much time she had left, but I knew something else. My brother had crossed the impossible so I wouldn't arrive too late. And this time, I wasn't going to waste the chance he gave me.